Hello everyone and welcome to our sessions on digital heritage inspection and survey, which are kindly funded by Historic England. This is a programme of 10 sessions for learners of different experiences and backgrounds to find out more about how digital models and digital twins are being used in the heritage sector. There's a WhatsApp group where the learners can co-mentor and share resources too. My name is Linda Jubb and I'm your host today. I'm a Chartered Building Surveyor and Fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Our practice, Jubb Clues, specialises in the survey and repair of historic buildings. Everybody and welcome to session 8. Today's session is about record keeping, and we've touched on this a few times in the previous sessions. These models are extremely large sets of data, and also for historic environment we're very careful to keep records about what we do. Going back to conservation principles, one of the principles is that whether it's from ICOMOS or the Historic England conservation principles, is that we keep good records about what we've done, so that in future people can carry out the sort of research that we like to do before we start any work on protected structures. But also in terms of assessing how important buildings are, we need to have a look at those records, and it's a comparison of what physically remains as well as documentary evidence. I'm going to run a quick poll. Do you have a disposal policy for digital materials? Now, we all should have one. You might go into a bit more detail about what it is, and also how comfortable you are in terms of using it. So the results are that one person here, I don't know who it is because it doesn't tell me that, has got a digital disposal policy for their digital materials. And everybody else is, no, we don't. So I hope you'll get a lot out of this session. You might be able to go away and write yourself a disposal policy based on this. That person who answered yes, would you mind just pop your hand up or put your video on and tell us a bit more about the answer you've given? Is that all right? Can you do that? Okay. So today we're going to cover off about storage and archiving. We'll come back to policies later. I think it's worthwhile knowing what the different methods are. We've touched on them in previous sessions, but we'll just try and sweep that up for you. I want you to understand around copyrights, because there's been some developments more recently, and copyright is sometimes an issue that's controlled by your clients and even by your clients' clients, i.e. the funders, and Heritage Lottery in particular. There's a problem, isn't there, between different kinds of software. If you were here in the earlier session and we talked about Matterport, it's a great platform for sharing. It's very accessible and not expensive to get into, but actually you don't own the data. So that's a bit of a problem. But also when the software changes, can you move between different softwares easily? This is what we mean by legacy systems and supersession. I know for our Vectorworks, for instance, which is our CAD package, that is now on a different kind of license from the license that we bought into, which is fine because our license is renewable. But there will come a time, I think, when the license that we're on will be superseded, and we just need to make sure that we can bring forward those drawing files when we can do that. That's where we're going to talk a little bit about disposal policies as well. And finally, we have touched on sustainability before, but it is a big issue. These are huge things, and storing them requires electricity and connectivity and things that are using energy. On the right of the screen here, you'll see a little screenshot from Heritage Digital. I should at this point credit Heritage Digital with helping us with this project. It was a project that was run with funding from National Lottery, and the objective was to try and get the heritage sector to digitise more, doing the things that you've seen, like these virtual tours for visitors, or engaging through websites and so on. Remember, in the heritage sector, there's lots of organisations that are just volunteers, They're doing it with their own two hands and whatever they've got. And for them, if they can use, free software and they can build systems like this, actually there's huge economies for them. And it's still worth going to have a look at the case studies now. That project is completed. As I say, we have to give our thanks there, because they gave us a lift with what we're doing here in the form of some mentoring, to support me in putting this course together for you. First of all, if we talk about storage and archiving, there's obviously lots of different ways you can store the models. How you store them depends on quite a few different factors. So one of them will be just the size of it. Some of these records are enormous. And when we were talking about the viewers in the last session, things like the Faro web share, they're built for the very large point clouds for that kind of data. So the size of the volume of the data will make a difference about how you store it, especially if you want all the raw data and you don't want to sort of process away any of the data that you've collected. The other thing that might influence how you store the data is how complex the data is itself. Is it from lots of different sources? Does it change regularly? How do you want to access it, and how do you want to share it with people? Quite a lot of the data that you'll get for your heritage statements, for instance, will come from digitized paper records, things like previous heritage statements, things that have been up through planning portal, old photographs that have been scanned in. You should be aware whenever you do that you're actually just making copies and copies of data that's already stored somewhere else. So there's an efficiency to think about there. There's issues with security as well. Again, projects that we've worked on, very sensitive locations, the clients wanted to keep all the data on their servers because it is, it has security implications either for the people who work there or for us all, that data can't be shared. You have to think about the timing of the data as well. Does it need to be accessed in real time? Is it being recorded in real time, or is it historic data that's collected at intervals? One of the things that make a big difference to how you store the data is your budget as well. Obviously, there's a goal here that we have efficiency about what we store, and some of the high-end solutions in cloud storage and GIS can be very expensive, so they tend to be held by larger organizations and you can just sort of rent your space. And we've also just touched on things like Sketchfab, context capture, Faro web share, and so on in the last session. And I'm happy to go over any of that with you if you wish. There are hybrids between sharing on the cloud and sharing on your own servers. One of the cloud services we use a lot here is the Dropbox, and that means that our own systems aren't overloaded. With the paid for services, we get 10 years of backup, so even things that we've deleted, we can recall them, and it's very secure. We've never had a problem with it, and we do our cybersecurity regularly. So there are these hybrid methods that mean you can download just something that you're working on, and then the rest of the time it's archiving automatically up in the Dropbox. It's also really good for sharing as well, because sometimes we're with clients or we're with other team members. You can open parts of the Dropbox to some people and not to others. Similar things are available, and I think most people are using them now, OneDrive, iCloud and stuff like that. In terms of the local solutions, what's in your office and in your laptop, there's obviously the portable and external drives and the internal drives. And I know that a lot of people who are working in geospatial are still storing the data locally in external drives, and they're increasingly affordable. So that's something that's possible. Backing up, of course, is really essential, and you'll remember that at all stages in the processing, when Kira was talking about how we process data, there are points at which backups are essential, partly because it would just be unaffordable to go and collect the data again, or in the case of building or an asset that's been destroyed, you may not get the opportunity to go and collect it again. So there are pros and cons with storing data on the cloud. One of the obvious advantages for us is the fact that it's backed up, and also that it's got a huge capacity, so we don't need as much space locally for our storage. But the drawbacks are obvious as well, in as much as it's under somebody else's control, and you do sort of worry about security. And when you hear of like large scale cyber attacks, you think, well, that's probably where they would happen, is on the cloud. Local storage, as I say, we would struggle to keep up with the amount of storage that we need locally. But on the other hand, we do still keep hard backups of stuff, you know, that we know that is our last resort if we have some kind of data loss, and it's easier to insure for that as well. You still would be in a terrible position if there was a fire or a flood, you know, it wouldn't help necessarily. So when you've finished your project, and the archaeologists who are here, can we have a quick show of hands how many archaeologists are here? Archaeologists are extremely good at storing their project data, because of course that's almost the job, isn't it, to go out and record what's there and make sure that it's understood and readily available on the public record. So one of the deposits that we use is OASIS, and I'm just going to have to check what I do know what the acronym stands for, just bear with me. Online Archaeological Site Information System, there you go, OASIS, which is where a lot of historic environment records go. Sometimes it's a planning condition, you know, if we've looked at a building for a client, maybe a locally listed building, and they've been given permission to demolish it, there will be a condition about recording the building, and that will be not only recording what the physical state the building is, because obviously that's at risk and it might be lost, is also putting with that the historical information that would go in the heritage statement, so people know why it was significant and why we've recorded it. That's the kind of record that we put to OASIS, and they have very strict terms for the deposit and a fee that we have to pay. So obviously when we're doing a quote to do a recording project, we have to include in that the deposit fees, you know, trying to make it clear to the client, you know, that this is going into the public record and they have to present it in a certain format. The other place where you could put something like a point cloud is to ADS, which is the Archaeology Data Service. I really encourage you to go and have a look at their website, because they'll show you there what their terms are for taking deposits, and they'll help you through that if you haven't done it before. They've got something here, you can see it here, called ADS Easy, which is for smaller projects where they can take, you know, the kind of thing that you would do in Mark, you would be able to maybe lodge that there with them. They can't take everything. They've got a maximum size at ADS Easy of 100 meg and or 1,000 files, and the actual physical size of the geophysical survey is less than 50 hectares. So there's that stream that you could go on, or you could go on to the main deposit, and you will get funding as well if it's part of your project to do proper archiving of your results, and that makes them available to the public. So there's amazing things that you can go and have a look at that are on the record there already. This is an example of some work that I saw there. This was a project to record the caves of Nottingham, and that was done with laser scanning and integrated photography. So it tells you a lot about the specification and so on of the data that they've collected there. Once a project is complete, you will have the choice of putting it into one of those formal public records. Some of our clients keep their own archives. So I think you'll remember from the very first session, we talked about the laser scan that we did of Blackpool Winter Gardens. Now, they already had in their archive all the paper copies of the drawings of that building in each phase of its development, the architect's drawings. So they wanted to hold their own archive and have that continuity of going from paper copies into digital. So that was deposited in their own archive, and we took it on an external drive. Here it is. Mark, the models that you shared this morning in the WhatsApp group, I'm interested in seeing whether we can tag them into Historic England to enhance the list. And John and I spoke briefly about that yesterday, as well as whether using sort of what is effectively already a geospatial model, which is the GIS layers of the Historic England list, to put in things like additional data like photographs and so on, just to say this was scanned or this was recorded, and to signpost where the record is kept. In future, I think people will really, really value our digital recording projects. But at the moment, I've seen that really recently Historic England had acquired a huge collection of black and white photographs, because of course they have got more significance for us, and actually recording them, because they, their archival importance is even greater, means that our digital models are maybe further down the queue. But as time rolls on, that's going to become something that people look for. I've never deposited anything with the local historic environment record with the HER, but that's maybe another conversation, Mark, you and I can have to see whether we can get some digital archives on there. And I'm going to talk in the next section about copyright and intellectual property, but it might be a good time to bring in John Bedford, because we talked about what happens to the projects you do briefly yesterday, and you're holding a lot of those in your own archive at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we deposit stuff with the National Archive, that used to be the NMR, the National Monuments Record. But we're principally archiving the TIFF files, the images that we take as TIFFs. I mean, one of the general things about all of these files is attaching metadata to them. That's really quite important. I mean, we use Bridge, but there's any number of applications which you can use to add metadata to images. And if you've got several thousand images and things, it's actually extremely useful. You can just add to the IPTC core description field, for example, just a brief summary of what's going on. What the site was, what the year was, who took it, those sorts of things. And it can be very quick, and you can apply that sort of metadata en masse, but it stops those images getting lost or disassociated from the data that goes with them. Which site was it when? That's quite.
I fell down a wormhole learning about metadata, because actually there are committees that meet to agree metadata standards for historic environment archives, which I think was a 17 heading sort of list of what was to be recorded in that metadata.
Yeah,
and I mean, also quite a narrow field of file types that, like you say, in your case, just the TIFFs rather than other kinds of I think most of us have either
JPEGs aren't good to store because they're compressed files, and it's lossy compression. So every time that file is saved with compression at 80% or something like that, if it's not 100% quality, then the quality iteratively degrades. So we don't use that. TIFFs can be compressed using lossless compression, so you're not throwing any data away. And that's why there's an archival preference for those. I mean, I suppose scientifically speaking, the best thing you should do is keep the raw files, but that's not often manageable. And they don't.
Most of us are keeping data that I know we're keeping data beyond the normal disposal policies. And anyway, I promised I would come back to that, because there's very good business and technical reasons why you might want to do that. At the moment, you've got an enormous archive then that you're just waiting for the public archive service to sort of expand and become user friendly for that kind of deposit.
Yeah, I mean, especially with laser scans, I mean, there are all sorts of problems with archiving laser scans. I mean, there's a general acknowledgement that E57 format for those, which is a sort of generic format, is preferable to anything else. I mean,
Is that
manufacturers
because of the legacy problem of it just being able to
absolutely
sustain access to it?
sustain access to them. Manufacturer specific formats are much more difficult for an archive to manage. Really. And the ADS's response to that used to be send us the scans as ASCII text files. I don't know whether that's still the case, but you can imagine that scans rendered as ASCII text pretty soon. That's a ridiculous quantity of data, and it's
Yes.
not really a practical solution. I mean, if we're racking out 100 odd scans a day for a week on a site, that's terabytes of data, so it's not really manageable.
Yes, I think that those I think you were saying something about a project with, what was it, 3 or 4 terabytes of data each, and those
Yeah,
are the quantities of data that you're collecting in a week or two.
I mean that's including raw scans, raw images, then processed images, processed to TIFF scans, registered, cleaned, all of that sort of stuff. So you end up with effectively 2 copies of everything. You've got working copies that you're using to produce your models, and you've got back at the other end, you've got the raw data that you built all that with.
It's true, isn't it? Because once you've done one of the processing steps that we were talking about with Kira was the decimation, which was obviously with the objective of lightening the data, but you're also making it more heavy because now you've got 2 copies, one that's like a lower resolution than the original, but it's more
Yeah,
portable in terms of being able to share it with people. Yeah, I think
that's
there's
right.
a lot of duplication, and one of the huge benefits of digital data is that it is very easily copied, but that is contributing to this sort of over storage problem. In terms of dealing with copyright and intellectual property, copyright in English law is Copyrights, Designs and Patents Act 1988. And that dominates everything. And just very simply to deal with it in terms of the work we do, if you're holding the camera when you press the button, that's your copyright. Even if the camera belongs to somebody else, that's your copyright. When you give that photograph to a client, because you photographed their property, it's still your copyright, but they're allowed to use that image under a license, which is contained within your payment and your agreement. So we have it very specifically in our T's and C's. This image is for your use for the agreed purposes only. And the same with the other kinds of information that we propose for people. That's not the same as being able to share things in public and creating things for everybody that we can share. It's important though, and it's been in the news recently when you think about artists like musicians and so on. They're saying that you can't have AI just learning how to compose by just listening to everybody else's music. It's shared under license for enjoyment, not for copying, not to be infinitely emulated. So what we've been using in the heritage sector, and there's some really good advice around this on Heritage Fund website, is what they call Creative Commons license. And this means that they're made available for use, reuse and engagement, which are the sort of heritage sector uses, and it's different from the normal copyright. So when you see something that's on the public record that's been published with a Creative Commons license, the actual creator has handed it over for public use. And we try to encourage people to be able to sift through the materials that we create for them. Having Creative Commons license over something like John's pointed out, that the point cloud is not useful because it means that it will be propagated and used over and over, but it's not as usable as the end product, which has been through the processing and it's had those quality control and intellectual property added to it about what it's for. It's got control through the metadata as well. So if you are very interested to learn more about copyrights and licenses, I would recommend that you'll go to this document, and I will put it in the share pack. When you're agreeing with your clients what you're going to do, it is good, and vice versa, if you're a client agreeing with your consultant or contractors what you're going to do, is to just go through this little checklist of what are you doing, when are you going to archive it, and when are you going to destroy it. What are the fees? Are there fees for maintenance fees for the archiving, or is it a one-off deposit fee? What are the permissions around reuse in future? And what happens if, is this data insured? Is it backed up? How will you be harmed if for any reason we can't keep hold of this data? We've also touched on supersession, and John mentioned these E57 laser scan point cloud file types. Different kinds of file types come and go. I can remember, for as long as I've been working, there's been all sorts of different, some of them are more resistant to change than others. I think .pdf has been a very, very good file type and very accessible by a wide range of people with very simple equipment. But other things such as AutoCAD files, as I say, with our Vectorworks files, we're always updating and trying to keep up with modern systems. So when you're migrating between the two systems, obviously you've got a balance of risk and opportunity. You might get low maintenance costs or become more efficient, but at the same time you worry about data loss and whether you can get enhanced performance from stepping over. And this is what we would be advising you do when you are looking at the end of life and either archiving or destroying files, is if you can destroy something and it's agreed within your policies and you've checked in with your clients. Sometimes we do check in and we say we're just about to delete something. Are you okay with that? That's the best thing to do. But if you do need to keep it, is to make sure that it is going to be robust for conversion into future use. I'm going to skip over the poll actually, and I'm going to, in fact, stop the share and introduce Andrew because he's with us now. Andrew.
I'm Andrew Knight. I've been with RICS for 14 years. I'll put my hand up virtually. I'm not a surveyor, but I've been here 14 years and worked in professional standards and external affairs, and now work in our kind of thought leadership and analytics. I have a long background in IT and computing, so I think in a good way I've ended up with this role at looking at the effect of AI and data and tech on the whole profession. So glad to be with you all.
So in terms of copyright, legacy systems, data hostage, we've been looking at it in the context of sort of geospatial data and the sort of public records we make for heritage. Has that been a problem for property and construction more widely?
Every sector now is becoming more digital, and I suppose I would sort of say the challenge for our sector is that arguably we've been kind of behind the curve on becoming digital in the way that we curate and gather data. And so I think for us, we're playing that kind of terrible catch-up game of understanding the kind of challenges that other businesses have been dealing with for a long time around cybersecurity, and the fact that more that we digitize the data that we collect or people collect on our behalf, the more we run into these issues of where is it, how well is it protected? If we're attacked, can people effectively, as you say, either hold us hostage, or if it's confidential information they think has value itself to be shared and sold, we're now bumping into those kind of issues that arguably other sectors have had to deal with more regularly. And I think, unfortunately, because the bad actors out there aren't necessarily that discerning about the organization's attack, they will simply attack any organization where they find some kind of weakness, some kind of vulnerability. And from that point of view, they'll decide that they can encrypt your data and make it, useless to you, irrespective of what kind of data it is. They just know they can disrupt you and, effectively take your data hostage, even though arguably you might think, well, the data's not valuable to them, but it's valuable to you.
Now that's really interesting, because you've talked about people in a sort of like quasi-criminal contexts, where actually they're trying to sort of extort or disrupt, or as you say, bad actor. But in the previous session, we were talking about different sharing platforms, and I gave the example of Matterport. Now, with Matterport, of course, you never own the data. It's collected on a Matterport machine. It goes into a Matterport server. You can look at it, and as long as you keep paying your fee, you can continue to enjoy your own data. And it sort of transgresses the normal laws of copyright, which is, if I've made something, it's mine, sort of thing. And that was maybe what I was hinting at with data hostage.
I see. Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, that's that kind of vendor lock-in walled garden where you end up effectively unknowingly sacrificing copyright, as you say, and perhaps even more challengingly, the ability that you can't, data portability, that you want to be able to move that data potentially either to your own platform or to another cloud service, for example. And I think that that's really, unfortunately, a kind of a caveat emptor, that we need to be really, really careful when we start using some external vendor, whether to host data or to collect data, as you say, using something like Matterport as an example. We need to be very, very careful in the small print about, well, actually, where does copyright reside? Where is this hosted? Is it, can we shift it from one platform to the next easily? And it's just one of those challenges now that we're going to need to kind of, if I can use the phrase, up our game in terms of the way we think about procuring those kind of software services. And arguably, there's a similar issue around liability. I mean, if something's wrong with the data that somebody else has collected on our behalf, who's liable for that? I'm not saying Matterport would make a mistake, but if you use some service to gather data for you on your behalf, and there's some technical error with that data, where does the liability sit? Because you'll be producing.
That's really interesting, because
you'll be producing work output for your client, and your PII is sitting there, and you've used some other third party who may have made a mistake. Sorry, Linda, I could have talked over you.
No, it's difficult, isn't it? There's a very tiny delay, and it's difficult. We were just also talking about Creative Commons copyright licenses before you came, which are a condition of Heritage Lottery, which is one of the major funders in our sector. So something like Matterport would be completely inappropriate, because, as you say, you wouldn't even have control of the copyright from the outset, and therefore, to some extent, in the heritage sector, we're missing out on the savings that are possible from using those kind of providers, and incurring for ourselves some cost. I mean, we've said to clients before now where they've had to have a maintenance fee for the storage of their data. We've made it really clear in our T's and C's at the start. The project's gone ahead. 2 years later, we're dealing with a different treasurer or a different CFO, and they go, oh no, we don't need to pay for that anymore because that project is finished. Maybe them assuming, and we've reminded them, no, it's an annual fee, they'll take it down, it's not something we can recover for you. And that actually did happen. That's made me more cautious about offering clients the option, because even if they think they want that option in the short term, in the long term, they don't, and it's not what they would expect of their surveyors, really.
Yeah. That's why I think we have to be so careful in terms of the fine print and the T's and C's about using these external services. So
yeah, it takes us down the ethics route as well, because data ethics is such a big topic at the moment. Obviously, for us as surveyors, that's quite easy because we're used to, as you say, being responsible for the quality of the data, checking it at every stage when we take it on, when we put it out, when we pick up somebody else's work, insuring for it. Do you think that data ethics is something that society as a whole is comfortable paying for? Has it gone down their shopping list of things that they need?
I think, ironically, I think it will go up the agenda. I think as people become more aware about how their data is being used and the implications of it being misused either maliciously or in error, I would hope that people, and perhaps this will be driven by the kind of the AI wave that we're seeing at the moment, that actually people will, I would imagine, be more sensitive. I mean, if we think of somebody walking around and doing a vision gathering survey of a particular asset, we've got to think about the privacy and the ethical use of that data by potential third parties. And it comes back to this issue once again, that if somebody else is holding that data, Are they using it to train their AI? Is it going to leak out in some way? So I think people will, I would hope, become more aware of the fact that their data, has a resonance to do with them and their assets, and therefore they should be thinking even more clearly about, well, where will this data reside and who else can see it, and how is it being used? Is it being in any way leaked into the public domain for a reason that I don't particularly want? That they'll suddenly end up somebody trying to ring up and sell them, I don't know, solar insulation or whatever. There's that sense of the data then leaking out for other purposes.
Yes, because it is so user-friendly. I'm going to open it up to the floor a bit. Are there any questions here in the group for Andrew, or people who want to share experiences around data ethics? They're very shy. Well, they haven't been, but they are today. Well, I'm going to carry on the conversation with two other issues that you just touched on there. One is in terms of data storage and sustainability. I mean, these data centers, they're hungry, aren't they?
They are, and it's funny actually in the sense that there's a number of dynamics around the whole data center piece that I think is hopefully people are becoming more aware of, because, and once again, I'll mention the whole kind of AI piece, where obviously people are now investing huge amounts of money around the, as they call it, the compute to run AI models. And there's a number of kind of interesting dynamics going on there, in the sense that obviously we use data centers and the cloud for, storage of data, the kind of Matterport stuff you've talked about, where, we use it for firms that have their websites hosted, or we use it for the so-called software as a service, where we run a particular piece of software, might be a piece of HR software or something specific to the built environment, which is hosted in a data center somewhere. And so we've obviously seen this huge proliferation of data centers, and the chips inside those data centers, it's full of racks and racks of servers and disks. They use energy, which obviously has to be hopefully produced in a carbon neutral way, you would hope. It produces a lot of heat, which has then to be cooled using air conditioning and water. And in fact, one sort of interesting thing is that, for those of you who perhaps use generative AI, if you have a conversation with something like ChatGPT or Claude, a typical conversation uses half a litre of water. So it's not just the electricity, that water is being consumed by these. The funny thing is that the AI is increasingly being able to run on fewer of these chips, and also the people who make them, NVIDIA particularly, are increasing the power of these chips by orders of magnitude. So there's a number of dynamics there about, yes, we need more data centers, but also the models may become more efficient. We may be able to use the compute more efficiently. So I think it's hard to predict exactly how many data centers we need, or will need, but they certainly do require energy. Certain big operators are even talking about building their own small nuclear power stations next to them, or having their own renewable power sources. And certainly certain data centers are deliberately built in the Nordics, for example, where it's obviously easier to cool them because you're in a cooler climate. But then you have the trade-off in terms of what they call the latency, where you're a long way away from most of your users. So there's a lot of dynamics there, but they certainly will be using considerable amounts of power, considerable amounts of water. Luckily, I think we've seen the worst of the kind of cyber currency Bitcoin thing, where those mining things were using huge amounts of electricity. So it does ebb and flow, but we all of us need to realize that if we use AI or store large amounts, and as you know, with the kind of images that you're gathering, these are large quantities of data, there is a cost associated. This is not free technology in that sense, not only in terms of the licensing and the storage costs, but there are electricity and water requirements. So there is a sustainability issue that we ignore at our peril. And I guess for me, it's a message of, let's not overuse technology. Let's use it when it's appropriate, and perhaps not gather data when we don't really need the data. And also be realistic about when we can let go of some data. If it's no longer required, then let's let it go and relinquish the overhead of storing that data.
We talked briefly at the start of this session. We did a quick poll to see who actually has a data disposal policy, and not everybody does. Does our ICS itself, as part of its ethical commitment, its environmental commitment, have a data disposal policy? Or can you share the bones of that good practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. We've not necessarily refreshed that in terms of the sustainability issue, where we have issued guidance in the past, and once again, that might need refreshing. Is really back to tort, and in terms of the length of time you should keep information from that kind of contractual position. So our advice historically has been mainly based around the requirement to keep data, whether it's digital or analog, paper or digital, around tort, and the number of years one needs to realistically hold that to be able to deal with some issues that might come out from a contractual point of view. But it is a point that we should begin to look at that broader sustainability issue about data retention. There's obviously the whole around personal data. There's the whole GDPR thing around the need to stop, stop recording personal information when it's no longer required. But that's a jurisdictional requirement that we all need to be aware of when it's personal data. But I think if we think of the kind of large volumes of data you might collect on an asset, that's a different question. But I think it would once again come down to kind of those issues of contractual needs to retain the data.
We did touch on it actually in an earlier session about when we're doing data collection. Again, just from an ethical point of view, is if you're in somebody's home and they have children, we don't photograph toys.
Exactly.
We don't photograph people, and we as soon as possible either delete or redact it, because holding things for GDPR, if you do get a subject access request, is actually quite burdensome on the data holder to respond to that, but also for us to have the confidence and trust of people when we're out collecting data. I think it's good for them to know, and we say up front, we're not going to photograph the front of your car, we're not going to photograph its toys. Is there a room that you don't want us to go in and out of the recorders and things
exactly
like
that? No, and I've heard stories of people getting caught out where the images they've taken have included photographs. So you've got to be very careful about the images you collect in that way. It's certainly and I think also a lot of that comes back to being so upfront in your terms of engagement, so that both sides are really clear about what you will store, how long you'll store it, what you'll redact in that way. So it's important to be, I think, as ever, incredibly transparent up front about how you're going to gather images in that way, and indeed store them, and what use you're going to put to them. Almost imagine that GDPR is there for almost every assignment in terms of how you intend to use the data you're collecting, even if it's not necessarily relating to personal or protected characteristics, for example.
And I'm going to touch on one more thing before we close up the meeting today, was AI. Of course, it's what everybody's talking about, and Macron had his conference recently. Did you feel as though the direction of travel with AI is virtuous, or is it, do you think, something we should be concerned about, or that we need to be more guarded with?
I think it's a combination of both, and for information that there will be a standard on the responsible use of AI coming out of our ICS for public consultation in probably a couple of weeks' time, so do keep your eye out for that. My personal view is that there is both risk and opportunity there. There is a risk for the profession not to use AI in a responsible way and use it as a productivity aid and a tool, but there is a huge risk if we don't use it in the right way, if we abdicate responsibility to an AI bot to produce work output and reasoned advice that frankly will be wrong and will mislead. It can be used to produce images that are very misleading of what a building might look like, for example, in the context of brokerage. So it has the potential to do a huge amount of harm and a huge amount of good. So it sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's about the fact that, like any tool in the wrong hands, it can be very dangerous, but it can also be very useful if it's used responsibly and knowledgeably as a tool to augment your role as surveyors. So it's a bit of a cop-out answer, Linda, but we've got there is a risk to not using it, because there'll be instances where it's a tremendously productive and useful tool to have in your toolkit. But if it's misused, there are huge dangers.
I think the reality is, Andrew, there's I've been in meetings around drafting guidance notes, and what we've had to say about the use of AI, which is that it is just a tool, and there's a commercial reality for firms choosing the better ones. And if we want to live in a virtuous world, we have to behave in a virtuous way and invest in the good AI, so that they crowd out the bad actors,
Mm.
you know, to set our face towards creating a virtuous environment for it. And talking to people who are much younger than me that are, you know, sort of digital natives, as they call them, and they're Gen Zs, and they're working in AI and developing these AI. What I've been told by them is that if they were given a pathway, career pathway, whereby they could work in virtuous environments where the ethical systems are there, that will automatically deprive the bad actors of the best brains and the best tools, and that we should be responsible consumers of AI and invest in it in a responsible way because of the benefits that it can bring us.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, you know, I think the profession can take a lead here and make sure that the best kind of AI is built for the sector, and that actually the role of the surveyor is even more important to curate and be that professional skeptic to make sure that AI is used responsibly.
Yes, and promoted for its virtues and not its spices. So I've got a couple of minutes left in which people can ask questions. This is your last chance, because Andrew, well, you're very welcome to come next week and the week after. I know that your diary's been extremely full, and I'm very, very grateful that you've made
pleasure
this today. It's been really interesting, and it was really important that we touch on all those things, because these sessions have been a mix of sort of pure tech and how you do things, but it's always been about the why. You know, why do we do it this way? So that we can, you know, bring people together from different disciplines. Is there anybody else who would like to contribute today? Any questions? Well, that being the case, I'm going to thank Andrew again. I'm going to thank John again. Thank you for your contribution, John. Thank you, all of you, for coming. And if you can come next week, we'll be talking about the business end of this, which will be specification, procurement, and grant aid. So thanks again, everybody, for coming. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.